Hello, everybody. Welcome to Session 2, Week 2, Human Resources, Information Management, and Research. And as I mentioned before, we'll get to that research part towards the end of the course, and it's all about looking at your workforce, figuring out what they're up to, what their behaviors are like, and how to make those changes. But up front, we need to work hard to establish information management system, which we'll look at today, so that we can have the intelligence ready to be able to do research. Now, in the last session last week, we spent some time covering the course setup. I wanted you to be comfortable with how the course is set up, and only one change has been made, is that I'm putting all of your content now into weekly folders. So when you go to My Seneca and on the menu, you'll see right at the top, weekly sessions, you'll have everything in week 1, week 2, week 3, so that you only have to go to the other areas if you want to see optional resources, right? That'll be good for you. I've also updated the schedule. You'll be able to see all the material week by week that we'll be covering. We also then talked about the fact that there are 3 deliverables in this course. There's an Excel test, a pivots test, and a standard written test at the end of the course, and also a 10% discretionary grade for. I think what we'll do is we'll get you to explore some Tableau and some Taleo. It'll be a nice little thing for you to have, and I'll compensate you for it upwards of 10%. We also talked a little bit about your personal brand, and I hope you appreciate that it is important to establish that your attitude, your confidence, your image, your personality, but more importantly, the skills and competencies that you will put on your resume and your LinkedIn and wherever you broadcast who you are, so that employers have something to buy. So your brand is your product. You are the product. Make sure that your employers like that. They like your packaging. They like the ingredients, what are inside, and they want to buy you over anybody else. So we'll do more of that. I'll do a session for you later on about pathways and additional things you could put on your resume for free, usually for free, sometimes a little bit of money, just to make your brand that much more fine tuned. We then started talking about HRIS framework. Framework is things that you need to know before we can move on. Things that are peripheral, things that are somewhat related, but are very important to our understanding of what HR is and what HR information management is. So we started talking about the organizational framework, where HR fits into any organization in the world, and we understood that what we do in HR is not just for HR, it's for people in those other departments. And we want to take some time to figure out who they are, what their needs are, how unique they are. And then in ending, we talked about the idea of data versus information. And I told you that data is just raw data, numbers, words. And when you add layers of meaning to data, it becomes information. And we want to be able to do that quickly. We want to be able to convert data to information, find what we want, all the good stuff, not leave anything behind very quickly so that we can start thinking about it. We spend more time thinking strategically about it, value added thinking, so that we can move on to what we call actionable items or actionable knowledge. This week, we're going to cover off more framework. We're going to talk about the 3 themes, or why HRIS has become important, very important. And we're also going to actually have a look at what an HRIS looks like. So, an actual model of how to look at, how to view, how to abstractly understand what HRIS is or what HRIM is. So, let's get started on that right now. So I want to start by talking about the 3 themes of why IM, or information management, has become so important. And to do that, we have to go back in time. And for our HR purposes, we'd go back to the 1950s or so, about 70 years ago. Before then, HR wasn't really even an HR. It wasn't a thing. It would have been somebody in an organization who can converse, who can read, write, I suppose, who had some business background, who would keep very simple records about their workers, they would call them, right? Not even employees, basic name, job they did, the pay they made. It would be very, very weak, very little data that they had to manage because they weren't really thinking strategically from an HR point of view. And HR really was never part of a strategic committee or team anyways. But then, since then, 3 things have happened to cause information management and HR information systems to become quite popular. In fact, a top 3 specialization, top 3 high-paid specialization within HR. One of them is that we became a global economy. globalization. If you don't know what that is, it just means we don't trade locally as much. It's more global. There's free trade. There's easy movement of people. There's transportation, communication. It's easier to move around the world to do business and to work. So the first thing happened is that in Canada especially, we became a predominantly service sector workforce or service sector economy. Now let's talk about the sectors. There are three general sectors, okay? One is manufacturing. One is resource. That's where you have your trees, your water, your mining out of the ground. Canada still has that. We still have some manufacturing. But the third is services. And what happened is because of globalization, different parts of the world realize that they can do other things better than other countries can, and other countries can do their thing better than they can. So in Canada, we carved out our role. We said manufacturing is not the place we need to be or can be at a right price, at a right cost that people are willing to pay. But what are we good at? We are really good at services. And by services, I mean where a business generates its revenue by the use of people. People become the product. So think about the law firm that I used to work at, right? My very first job, we had 350 lawyers. There's no manufacturing happening. In fact, the law firm would not be a law firm without the lawyers. So the lawyers themselves manufacture the service. They are the product. Me at Seneca, I am the product. A hospital, engineering firm, a bank. We're doing all of that for the rest of the world. We, in fact, do banking for the world. We do engineering for the world. We do law. We do hospitals. We do education because we're quite popular. So now, because we have a predominantly service sector economy, think about it. A majority of people working right now are service providers. So these organizations who employ them don't have equipment to manage. They can't physically manage people. But they have to manage the people because the people are the product. And if you need people to get your organization where it needs to be strategically, you need to be able to manage them. Now, you can't manage people physically. You can't grab them by the ear, by the arm, and push them around. But you can do one thing. You can manage information about them. Got it? More service sector people, more information to manage. Therefore, the mountain of data that we have to process has just gotten larger. Now, there are organizations who don't take that seriously. They don't really manage people by good information or all the information. They still do it basic, like in the old days. What I'm proposing is that you collect and keep and use data about people so they can manage them effectively. And I'll give you an example. You, as a student, I have to manage you. There's an investment by our government to your education, and we owe it to them to make sure that you get educated. Now, I could physically move you around and push you around and slap you on the wrist with a ruler. No, I can't do that. It's not legal. But I could manage you, so punish you if you don't do what I ask you to do, meaning read this or do that exercise, whatever. But see, I can't do that. What I can do is manage two critical pieces of information about you. One is your name, and the second is your grade. One would be a bunch of letters, that's your name, and a grade would be a letter. Got it? A, B, C, A plus, B plus, whatever. Now, if you do as I ask, you'll get an A. If you don't do as I ask, you'll get an F. Now, if you draw an A or an F, there's only one line that separates the two. One becomes an F, one becomes an A. And that's powerful information that I have that I can manage, use to manage your behavior. Now, in an HR setting, think about it. We manage information about people. First of all, in terms of should we receive your resume? Should we look at it? What's on it? Should we hire you? How much should we pay you? How do we take care of your health and safety, your training, your promotion, your benefits? All of that is used to attract people to work for you, the good people, the right people, to motivate you to work hard. Think about it, right? And to retain you, to keep you. And also information that we have can be used to figure out who's not working out so that we can get rid of them. We can terminate them because they're not working out for us. So now because of that mountain of information, our need to manage has gotten stronger. Now the second thing that has happened, and this you really have to do, first you can ignore, second you cannot, is since the 1950s, The government, in our country at least, and we're a democracy, has introduced a lot of law, more of it, and it's more complex related to employment. And your job in HR, and I got to tell you, your job is 50% of your job is to manage the law. Don't worry, you don't have to be a lawyer. You need to be conversant and aware of what the government's asking. Now, governments do ask businesses to do things that are good for the employees. Businesses look around, says nobody else is doing it, I'm not going to do it. So then they stop doing it. So governments then turn around and they pass a law. A law that now you have to do. You have to satisfy the requirements or you have to comply. Because if you don't, there might be a fine. You might be embarrassed in the media. They can shut you down. HR people can technically go to jail now. So government passes these laws, and two ways it works, okay? They either ask you to do something or they ask you not to do something. Think about it, right? So they ask you to pay minimum wage and give vacation pay and do maternity leave or parental leave. But then they also ask you not to discriminate, not to put people's health and safety in jeopardy, not to be biased towards a hiring or termination decision. And there's about 6 or 7 laws that you should become familiar with. And look, I know last week in a diagram, I put legal compliance as a box in HR. That's not to suggest it's a specialty. I don't think you're going to be an HR legal specialist. I mean, you might have to be a lawyer for that and work for a very large company. But you just might be that person. Think about this, okay? You might be that person who is a generalist, but you will become the go-to person if anybody needs to navigate the law. Meaning you took the time, starting now, once a week. You will download various reports that need to get done. You'll study them. You'll look at them. You'll look at all the requirements of the law, not in too much detail, but just general peripheral knowledge. So that if an employee gets injured and somebody asks you, you know which forms to fill out, 7A, 9C, WSIB. And the rest you can always call your lawyer. In fact, I'll tell you, good lawyers, I used to work at a law firm, our good lawyers will tell their clients, please don't call me for these things. I don't want to charge you. You can solve these yourself. Call me when it becomes big. You see? So now let's get back to legal compliance. There's 2 ways you have to comply with law. One is active compliance, and the other is passive compliance. Now, don't worry too much about the difference. I'm not teaching you employment law, and I'm not going to test you on employment law, okay? But active compliance is when the government asks you to fill out forms or produce reports. They actively want you to do something for them. The other side, passive, is where they ask you to do something or ask you not to do something, and you just make sure you do it or you don't do it. And the only time it becomes active is if you get sued or the government finds out. You still have to do it, though. Okay? So active compliance would be things like Employment Insurance Act record of employment. You have to fill it out. Workplace Safety Insurance Act Form 7A 9C. Your tax slips, Income Tax Act. There's a bunch of these. Employment Equity Reports 1 to 8. Forms 1 to 8. Your pay equity reporting. So you shouldn't know this today. But if you take, every other week, Google and download these reports for free, become familiar with it, you'll be able to talk during an interview about it, and you just might be that go-to person. It's a good place to be. Now, how do you comply with law? Government asks you to do something to comply. How do you comply? There's only one way to comply with law, and that's by having information. If you don't have information, you can't check to see if you did it or you didn't do it. And I'll give you a similar idea, okay? There's a law here called the Highway Traffic Act. If you drive, you know what it is. It's the law that governs roadways, right? And vehicles and so on. One of the laws, it says on a provincial highway, the speed is 100 kilometers per hour. And I think if you have a license, you would know that. I think it's universal, 100 kilometers per hour. But early on, there were no signs on the highway, and people were misunderstanding that 100 kilometers an hour. They were interpreting it to mean a minimum, meaning that's the lowest you can go, whereas it was supposed to be maximum. So the government did put signs up, 100 kilometers an hour. And then a few years later, put another sign called maximum below it, like we needed to be told. Well, of course we did, you see. You are sitting there right now saying, yeah, but how would you not know that? Well, you do. But there's so many other people out there who violate the law, knowingly or unknowingly. If we didn't, we wouldn't have government agencies enforcing these, and we wouldn't have a law firm to take care of the lawsuits, would we? So people do things. You never assume because you know it that other people will. So now the Highway Traffic Act does say 100 kilometers an hour. How do you know you're going 100 kilometers an hour, right? So 100 kilometers an hour is a benchmark set by the government. You have to use that benchmark to compare whether you're at the left or the right of it. Well, it just so happens in your car, there is a piece of information technology called a speedometer. You know that needle that goes back and forth? Now, you're supposed to look at it, and in some cars, they do beep. And in some cars, they won't even let you go more than 100, right, if you set it up. But when you look at it, you now have to interpret and make a judgment call. Am I okay going at 90? Well, you probably get a ticket if you go too slow. Am I okay going at 110? Well, everyone else is, sure. 120? Maybe. 130? You're pushing it, but people do. Now, none of that is active. But one day, when you get stopped by a police officer and the police officer gives you a ticket, that ticket, in fact, is a government report, a form that gets filed with the courts. And you are now going to have to pay a fine, or they take your car away, whatever. But you see, you're making a judgment call. So you all break the law. I mean, go down the highway. Police will not stop you on any given day if you're going at 110, as long as you're driving safe and you're going with everybody else. But you see, our interpretation changes. At the end of each month, the police have a quota, number of tickets they have to give. So at the end of the month, you'll see more police officers, and all of a sudden, your interpretation changes to, oh, better stay around 100. But when the next month starts, your interpretation changes again. It happens in HR too. So in HR, there are laws. For example, Employment Standards Act. You'll become very familiar with that law. Says there's a minimum wage. There's more than one, by the way, but the one we all know is $14 an hour. Now you're saying, but how dumb would it be for an employer to pay less than $14 an hour? I mean, look at an employee's name, look at their hourly pay rate, and see if it's 14 or more. If it's not, you have to make it 14 or more. But it gets more complicated when you get cases where you have salespeople or people working on piece rate or some other arrangement, where they might not make an hourly amount, but you have to kind of make sure at the end of the year it averages to $14 or more an hour. So you might be in non-compliance. In fact, I'll tell you another story of how this works. Look, there was a company, it's a true story. There was a company that had a factory and next to it a warehouse. Now, the warehouse had big, huge shelves with lots of heavy parts on it, and 6 warehouse employees plus 1 supervisor. And equipment. So they had trucks, they had equipment to package the boxes, shrink wrap them, and forklifts. Now, forklift, if you don't know, it's like a tractor, very heavy, and it's got 2 kind of pointy things in the front that pick up a bunch of boxes, lift them up and down, and move them around. And only the supervisor is allowed to drive the forklift, right? So the supervisor we had, he retired. Good guy, really knew how to do his job. He retired. They had a party for him. And HR had to replace that supervisor. You have to have a boss. So they were either going to go outside to find a new person, or they asked people inside, are you willing to do the job? And out of the 6 warehouse employees, 1 said, yes, I would like to do the job. I know I could do it. So they vetted him. They interviewed him. He was great personality, got along with this team, knew everything. And he was doing his job, doing it quite well. But about 3 months later, 4 months later, what happened was he was driving the forklift. And it crashed into a pole, a metal pole. The pole fell, didn't hurt anybody. But it also fell on a shelf, and the shelf toppled over, and a big, heavy metal part fell off the top and crushed another employee. The guy died. So here's how the law works. Okay, you know the ambulance, the police, the fire will come to help him. But also, the Ministry of Labor comes, and that's the government agency that regulates this sort of law. And they're going to look at everything. What did you do? What didn't you do? Was it truly an accident? What you find out is that when you promoted this guy, his name is Jack Smith, let's say, when you promoted him to warehouse supervisor, and he was the only one allowed to drive the forklift, you did not check to see if he has a forklift driver's license. Oh yeah, in Ontario, you need a license to drive it. I mean, the assumption was he knows how to drive it. How hard could it be? Even you, if you started within an hour, you'll learn how to drive it. To learn how to do it properly is a 1.5 day training. Doesn't cost much, about $400 or $500. But HR failed to see if he had that license, and there's a regulation that says you need a license. You see? Now, if it was proven that HR did that knowingly, they ignored it. Now, here's a chance where HR can go to jail. Right? Now, if we had an information management system in place, a proper electronic one, here's how it works. You go into the system, you log in, you go to Jack Smith, you change his job ID from warehouse employee to warehouse supervisor. Soon as you do that, the system checks all the requirements, mandatory and voluntary requirements for warehouse supervisor, and then they check what qualifications Jack Smith has. And right away, it will find one that is required, and it'll say, does not have forklift driver's license, cannot promote. You can still promote the guy if you wanted to, but system says don't do it. So right away, you would have a clue that says go send him out for forklift driver's training. That's how a system can protect you. I mean, that's just one example, and that's a great example of legal compliance. So when the government says do this or don't do this, you have to make sure that you comply. And the only way you comply is by having information. So there's a law called the Human Rights Code that says you cannot discriminate on the basis of several different things. And discrimination might be like this. If you wanted to promote somebody to a manager, and you're only promoting a certain type of person, let's say a male versus a female, or younger person versus an older person, you might not know you're doing it. It could be systemic. But if you had a good HR system and you were to promote one person, the system could actually go and look and say, hang on, there is another candidate that maybe is more suitable, but you would be discriminating against them if you did not hire them. Now, computer only takes you up to a certain point. You can at least now think about it versus just promoting people. And over the years, you realize I'm only promoting men of a certain age, not women, or vice versa. Okay? So legal compliance is all about information. Without information, you cannot comply with the law. So therefore, the mountain, the pile of information we have to manage, has just exploded, has grown. We have no choice with the law. Now, the third thing that has happened is that we now have a greater need to compete. Now, you got to think about this a bit, okay? We compete in a global marketplace. It's no longer a local marketplace, and we have our own market. So I'll give you an example. There are two companies, okay, in the market for office products, markers that we use to draw on a whiteboard, let's say in a business meeting or in a classroom. So there's an American company called Expo, and they make a pretty cheap 80-cent marker. You know, it's not ergonomically friendly. The ink isn't that good. It smells. But there's also a competition. Their name is Statler out of Germany. And they make a superior marker. The ink is good. It's stable. It doesn't smell. The handle is pretty nice, but it costs more than double. Now, the two companies compete in the market for office products. And it's a pretty global market. But the HR departments in those two companies, they also compete in their own market. Now, they should understand, HR should understand the market for the business's products. That's a good idea. But we also have to focus on our own market. And our own market for HR is called the labor market. Call it the job market, the people market, whatever you want, but it is the labor market. In it, there are people willing to work, and there are employers willing to hire. So employers have a demand. Person looking for work is a supply. So in fact, we are building you, each of you, as supply into the labor market for HR jobs. You're also going to be an HR looking for people in the labor market. So if there's a company that wants an HR assistant, entry level, and you are willing and able to work, and you two meet, and they hire you, we've achieved equilibrium. So some markets for labor are tight. Tight means there's few people willing to work. Some are loose, meaning there's more people willing to work. And HR market's pretty good right now. After all of this settles down, it'll really explode, I think, in my opinion. But now, when you compete in that market for people, remember, it's global. Years and years ago, I could have, if I needed one engineer, I initiated demand that I need an engineer, okay? And my job is to find the best, most qualified, most competent engineer for the money I'm willing to pay. So before, I could have called the University of Toronto, downtown Toronto, engineering school, got myself an engineer, the best one, and guaranteed he's mine or she's mine. But today, if I don't do that fast enough, a company somewhere else in the world is going to snatch up that engineer, is going to take them before me. They didn't steal the person, they just got to them faster. And that faster means having command of information. I'll set it up for you. Look, how quick do you have information to know that you need an engineer? HR planning. How quickly can you get the posting ready, get it out to the public to see it? That's staffing or recruitment and selection. How fast can you review the resumes? How fast can you schedule interviews? Review the interview, schedule rooms and flights and hotels. How fast can you decide who to hire? How fast can you do all your testing? How fast do you make a job offer? The number that goes on the job offer, the compensation. Then when a person hires, how well do you onboard, do the training, take care of health and safety, succession planning, and have information ready to know that the person doesn't work out, you should fire them. That's all information, and the quicker you do that, you'll realize the faster you can get the right talent, acquire, and motivate them to work and keep them. Attract, retain, and motivate. It's all information. So because we are now more competitive in the labor market and it's global, I think HR needs to have so much more information available quickly and to process it to remain competitive. Therefore, the mountain of information has just exploded. Right? Does that make sense? So now, that's a good start, more framework. But this thing I keep talking about, command of information, have systems in place, tools in place to manage the information, all that mountain of data I just showed you, it's great, it's there. It's not difficult to get it. But how do you then manage it? How do you process it so that it's useful to you? Well, I told you humans, we like to think about processing it, making the best out of it. But because it's difficult and tedious and monotonous for us to do, moving data around, counting, sorting, tabulating, charting, we hate doing it. So that our motivation to do it goes low. We get lazy about it after a while. But we introduce technology, and we know that technology is going to do it for us so that we could move on to do the stuff humans should be doing, which is thinking about it. So that, what I just described, is called your HR information system or HR information management system or HRMS. Call it whatever you like. And I have a diagram up, and it really just shows you what a system looks like. Now, don't get scared by the word system, because when you hear the word system, you think, oh God, I'm not technical. I don't know about systems. System is just an abstract idea. It's a organized way of doing something. It doesn't have to be technical. Like, take a look at your body. Your body is a system. It's a carefully choreographed, organized combination of things that make you. For example, every system has to have inputs and outputs and something in between. So your body has inputs. You take air in, oxygen from the air. You take water in through your mouth. You eat food for certain nutrients. And then you store it. Now, not all of us can store that efficiently. I mean, if you're diabetic, for example, you can't convert. And then we convert that, what we input, somehow. We store some of it, we convert it. And the output out of your body would be, well, the bad stuff, the stuff you get out of the washroom, the stuff that comes out of your mouth, your nose after you breathe out. But more importantly, an output is energy, right? So efficiently, we're converting that energy, and that energy allows your brain to work. It allows your eyes, your mouth, your nose, your hands, your feet, makes you walk. But there's no electronics in you, unless you have a pacemaker or a blood glucose pump or something like that. So an HRIS is no different if you think about it, okay? So I want you to picture right now your ideal HR office. You're working in this ideal company, your HR office in the corner overlooking the lake, great windows. Somebody just brought you some coffee. And there's 7 other people working around you. So I want you to close your eyes and picture data flowing in, that's your input. And data, information flowing out, that's your output. Constantly coming in, going out, coming in, going out. So when you get data in, you have to store it somehow. But wait. Before you store anything, you got to ask yourself, where the heck is the data coming from? I mean, do you want to be the kind of HR person who just waits in HR for data to come to you so you can deal with it? You can be reactive. You react to something that was brought to you. Or do you want to be the kind of HR person who actively pulls the data in, systematically knows where to get it, and then brings it in? Well, starting off, you need to figure out what the sources of your data are. Where is it coming from? And when you figure out the sources, you now put things in place like surveys and interviews and electronic internet ways of collecting data so that you actively, on a regular basis, go and get the data. Because data won't always just come to you, right? Like, for example, if an employee is going to go to a hospital for surgery for 3 weeks, yeah, that you couldn't go get. That they have to come and push to you, that data. But there's a lot of other data that you should actively go out and get because not everybody's going to push it your way. So I want you to think, and we'll do this again in about 4 or 5 weeks when we start HR research, but I want you to think about the sources of data. Where does data come from? Where do you go shopping for data? Right? Number one answer is employees themselves. And you don't just get it. There's a systematic way of getting data from people. How do you get it? What are some other sources of data that HR can use? It's kind of like food. We talked about your body, right? You all have to eat and drink. You know that, right? But some of us are foodies. We don't just want to eat and drink anything. We don't wait for dinner to be pushed in front of us. We actively know what we want, when we want it, how much we want to pay for it, and we know exactly where to go to shop for it. So that you are on a very timely basis getting the quality of ingredients or ready-made food that you want. You know where to go shopping for this. Because if you're lazy about it and you don't know where to go shopping for the ingredients or the food, then you're not going to be fed well. So in HR, of course, we have the same thing. If you don't go shopping for data and actively get the data in, your information system is going to starve. So data is the food for HR. Always remember that. And it could become highly efficient. So once we get the data in, we're going to store it. Minimal on paper. That's paper with filing cabinets. Now, I know today we can make everything digital, electronic. I know that. You still need some paper though. Anything with signatures on it. And paper is actually not bad. It's good. Look, it's portable. It's cheap. There's a certain romance to it. You can use it different ways. But it's very hard to actually consume that paper. You have to fiddle through it. You get paper cuts. We still need some paper. In fact, around 15% of organizations in Canada right now still in HR are managing employee data using paper only. And some of them it's really bad. Piles and piles of paper all over the place. And some of it is very efficient. What I'm proposing is that we add this component to it. The computer, the technology. Now, it doesn't matter what the technology looks like. Let IT worry about that. It could be desktop, mainframe. It could be like on the cloud, not the cloud. It could be a laptop. I don't know if I said that. It could be a tablet, a phone even. You can manage everything on a phone. In fact, right now on my Apple iPhone Pro, the big screen, I can tap in, log into a client's data, which is like 60 kilometers away. Look at any aspect of their workforce, right down to a picture of an employee, their records, and initiate a termination process. Anywhere. Thank God they implemented this a year ago. It's coming in very handy right now. So we introduced this technology within our system. See, we got the inputs really good. We can store on paper. That's efficient. We cleaned it up. But now the technology. is going to allow us to get through all of that data. Like I said, the sorting, the tabulating, the finding, the doing beautiful reports. Let the computer do it all. And it's not the machine, like I said, it's what's in it. So we introduce things like Excel, the most important tool, pivots, Tableau for visualization, and then we do applicant tracking using Taleo. But at the core, we have a real HR information system like SAP or Oracle PeopleSoft or Workday or Super HR. And you might have a different training system, or you might have a different system for health and safety. And when you have all of these tools in place and they work well, and remember, the HRIS coordinator works with IT to make all this happen. We even have automatic electronic attendance at the doors. So employees swipe a card, we take attendance. When you put all that together, the administrative burden you have in HR is reduced considerably, so that you can now spend more relaxed time thinking about your workforce, thinking about why people behave, looking for patterns and trends, and then initiating some sort of action to either make it better or clean it up. Now we're thinking strategically. We're looking into the future. We're proactive. And guess what? We get invited to the strategic team. Now, in between the two plus signs here, there's something missing. In my opinion, you can't have an HR system without the middle part. Technically, yes, you can, but let's not propose that. It's people. That's you. Now, there's bad news and good news. The bad news is, in the last about 25 to 30 years, since HR started using technology, remember, we would be the last ones to get anything latest, right? Because, remember, we cost a lot of money. People don't get us. But we start using technology because it's gotten cheaper, less costly. Software is available. It's less costly. So 25, 30 years, HR slowly have gotten into this technology. And out of that, about 15, 20% of organizations don't really use it properly. They use it for only basic Word, email. They don't use it the way I'm proposing. And out of the ones who do, half of them take it for granted. They only use the technology to make their lives easier. They don't do anything different with it. The other half use it. They harness the power that it offers. Make HR better, more fine-tuned. But in any case, because of that technology over the 25, 30 years, and it could do the work of a lot of humans, there's been a net decrease, my friends, in the number of HR people we need. That's bad news, isn't it? Not for you, though, don't worry. It's bad news for clerical and administrative level people. It's easier for them to find the work. They're not formally trained in HR. Now, I know your first job in HR for the first year is going to be administrative. Don't worry. You'll move into strategic later. But here's the good news, is that because of the introduction of this HR technology and what it could do for us, there's been a tremendous net increase in the number of HR people we need. Oh yeah, that's a good news. Not just any HR people, people like you, who are formally trained to be thinkers. See, so the computers, the technology is offering us so much more potential. It's showing us things within the data, things that we can use. We need credible people like you, more of you, to actually do something with that newfound intelligence. The HR systems are allowing us to harness the power of the data. We need you to actually do something with it. Okay, so that's the good news. So if you spent time creating a system within HR that looks like this, efficient input, systematic input of data, so you're constantly getting fed, storage so you can access the data quick, the right technology so you can process it quick, and more importantly, the right people in a team within HR who can now do things with that data, more strategic things, the thinkers, the analysts, who have an HR research view of their workforce and their capabilities. Okay. Now we're going to spend the next few weeks exploring elements of that technology. What is it? Different things. I'll start introducing Excel to you right after this. and then we'll do pivots. We'll do a little bit of Tableau, Taleo. We're not going to get deep into SAP and all that. It's an optional thing. I'd like you to look at as much as possible. We'll probably I'll give you a view of a system we use called Super HR, just to let you see what an actual HR system looks like. But one thing I'm going to tell you is I've seen so many graduates, students at the moment, who when they're ready to graduate, they kind of freak out. They say, oh God, all this conceptual stuff. How am I ever going to be able to do this when I get into HR? Ask yourself this. Thousands and thousands of people have graduated. How did they figure it out? How are they vice presidents and directors today? Think about it. You do. When you were a baby, you didn't know how to walk. Oh my God, I'm freaked out. What if I can't actually... Hey, look at you now. You're walking, huh? How do you pick up language? It's natural. It's intuitive. So if you're keeping an open mind and you're curious and you're aware and you're willing to learn, you'll be shocked. Once you go into a workplace, things just fall in naturally. They do, if you want to work hard at it. You know what? Get that confidence going right now.